Well, the best are always the hardest to get. So thanks, Bernard, for coming on the Leaders Who Care series.
Mark, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I think the last time I saw you in person was at World Economic Forum. I can't even remember which one, maybe a couple ago or something like that. Yourself, myself, and Ed were sitting in the hotel there somewhere and chatting and whatnot. So it's good to have you on. And I'm excited about you sharing with everybody all the great stuff that you're doing. But let's start with, if you could briefly introduce yourself. Don't get into all the work yet, but where you're from originally, family, something you've never told anybody ever and you want to tell them now. That would be pretty cool. Stuff like that.
Great. So my name is Bernard Kovac. I'm Austrian, grew up in a rural part of Austria. Actually studied then in Vienna and Paris, out of all the different places, and started my career in actually management consulting, building business for large companies. So
okay, we'll get to the business part soon. Talk about you, family. Tell us a little bit about you.
So grew up in Austria. I guess the work and life has taken me abroad to lots of different places. Now I'm family with daughter. So living in Munich in Germany now, where work and home is. But it's also I guess work is everywhere across the globe. So which happens to then lead me to lots of different places in quite some parts of the year.
No kidding. You said I'm going to talk briefly about you. Talk about Vienna. Vienna is one of my favorite walking cities I think I've ever been to. It's absolutely incredible. Were you in the Vienna Boys Choir ever?
No. I've seen them on TV, but I've never actually listened to them in person. But yeah, it's there's lots of culture, of course. If you like classic culture and stuff like that in Vienna, it's still, as a country, it's I would say it's a Austria with about 8 million people. It's it's a very safe place. It's a very convenient place. Good universities, there's business, but there's of course a lot of innovation and also exciting problems across the world that are outside, that are in other places.
Yeah, but the part I love the most, I did see the Vienna Boys Choir in person at the church, by the way, when I was
there, wow,
which was amazing. But the best part is walking around and stopping at cafes and the pastry. That really is the best part. So we'll get to that. But what were you talked about your daughter? What were you like as a kid? Were you building Legos? Were you playing sports, music? What were you like?
I did like Legos a lot. Did lots of music. I was doing mountain bike marathons in the later years of my youth, I guess. But I know, I guess up until when I actually graduated high school, people would have thought that I might become a professional pianist, which it turns out I did not become a professional pianist. Yes, I was also big into music at some point, which I still like to do as a hobby. But it's, I guess, as always in life, you have different choices that you're making, and for most part, I think taking them is also requires a leap of faith at times.
Yeah, I started wondering when people told me I should play the trumpet every time I started singing. So it's because I would stop singing. But it sounds like, not to be a cute dad jokes, but it sounds like you've played the right keys, aka piano, and where you've gotten to and what you're doing, doing right now. Your journey, if we start with education, you have 3 master's degrees around business. And if I can get them right, new venture development, international marketing, both at Vienna University, actually, and international management at HEC Paris. What were you envisioning at the time that then led you to Boston Consulting Group?
No, I guess I was always excited, also, about, interestingly enough, about music, business, arts, but then also creating, actually creating business, working for creating something with impact was something that I found exciting. And that's probably one of the themes also behind the studies of I studied is more in the background of like also like investment banking, also management consulting. Like, so these were the types of aspects of like, you know, creating something that solves people's problems. And I always like the aspect of international, like an international perspective of the world, which is like beyond like your immediate like surrounding. And I think that led me to actually study what I studied. You know, looking backwards, it seems like, you know, everything was kind of a laid out path, but like, it's of course only when you look backwards.
Yeah, it's never that laid out, is it? Type of thing, especially at that age. Was there an experience at BCG that intrigued you to join World Food Program?
So you know, at BCG, I was actually building a lot of businesses for large scale companies, like industrial goods companies, like large manufacturers, tech companies, and so on. For the World Food Program, like you know, I was always passionate about, you know, impact in a broader sense, like also social impact, not limited to just doing good in quotation marks.
Mm-hmm.
But I never quite knew even like how could I get engaged, because like, you know, I studied like more of the business side, like creating a lot of business for large scale companies, and I actually wasn't quite sure like how can that skill really make a difference for, you know, in the realm of social impact globally. And then I was active at BCG's social impact team, the sustainability team at the time as well, but that was just nothing that I did for work, if you want. Like, I created lots of new businesses.
Right.
And so I actually took a sabbatical, and then in that sabbatical joined the World Food Program, and that's where I built up the internal management consulting team. So I actually saw a job ad which was roughly about what I thought, well, actually, that looks like I could be the perfect candidate for this. And turns out like the hiring managers felt the same way.
I guess so. Yeah, it's amazing how you know, the forks in the road and the things that happen, you kind of wonder, was this meant to be beforehand or what? And you make decisions. I was never supposed to end, I'm from Canada. I was never supposed to end up in the States. I turned down my dream job to work for a professional hockey team that I really wanted to do, to go work for us. So I call social profits. Now, I don't like the term nonprofit actually, so I call them social profits. So it's interesting how you go down these paths. And can you describe your early experience at where you were heading up the business innovation in Rome? What did that feel like early on with World Food Program?
So at the time, I mean, it really was building up a team from, you know, scratch. Like, so the team didn't exist before. So in a way, it was as much trying to prove like that, you know, management consulting not only can make a difference, but also like having a team in like an internal management consulting team, what impact you can make. You know, you get people from outside the organization, like people with a management consulting background, infusing this like more of the private sector business thinking and knowledge and processes into like humanitarian response. It was also interesting because like we had some very early results and interest. At the same time, it's, you know, it was new, and actually getting the go ahead to say like, okay, this is what's interesting. We're working on, in the early days, supply chain optimization in places like
Right.
Afghanistan, or doing reorganization project. Like, you know, on the first glance, you would think like, why would the World Food Program, United Nations agency, actually need that? But like, in a way, like large nonprofit organization actually work similarly to like large corporates.
Sure.
And there's lots of efficiency gains. Like this is something that you can actually make things happen. And like they're very, very business oriented.
Yeah, I love that. What did you learn that led you to co-found and be the managing director of Share the Meal then, which is a highly, congratulations, by the way, a highly successful initiative.
So this was actually a very interesting moment when a friend and I, we realized that it only costs 80 cents to feed a child for a day for the World Food Program, like all costing, like including like overhead and everything. And at the time we were thinking is, this is crazy that, you know, there's not many people that actually know that it's so cheap.
Right.
And on
Yeah.
the other hand, there's so many, people who care, like people who really say like, I want to contribute, I want to help, but they don't know how. And so how can we actually bring that together? And that was the basic starting point behind Share the Meal. Like, let's assume we're having, dinner together or we're having lunch together. And then why wouldn't we share our meal for 80 cents with a child in need? And that was the starting point behind like Share the Meal, saying, okay, there's this button on your phone, and you're pressing that button and you can share your meal. And it's so simple. And right now it's over 230 million shared meals by almost 2 million people that have shared meals through the app and donated. And that's where, it is exciting for me where, it's literally, you can download the app wherever you are, you can just share your meal. And it's with this perspective of not making you feel bad, but making you feel good. You are sharing, you actually contribute towards something bigger. You can do this together with your friends. Um, while the 80 cents alone don't mean that much, if you and like the 10 friends of yours and the 10
Right.
friends of the 10 friends, all
Right.
of us together, we can actually achieve something meaningful.
No, I think it's brilliant and brilliant. I had a Deloitte partner when I worked at Deloitte. He said, brilliance is simple, he told me this years ago. And I kind of understood what he said, type of thing. I didn't, but what you're talking about is brilliance is simple. And when people, so people can do that now, right? It's still ongoing.
Absolutely. So it was actually App of the Year in 2020 from both Apple and Google.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go into the App Store on your iPhone or in the Play Store on an Android phone, download Share the Meal, and then you can just donate. And literally, it's like Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, whatever you actually want, like is a payment method. And I think that's part of the success here as well. Is like on the one hand, making it easy. So like it's easy for you to just do that. You can also do a subscription by now. But what's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people do that, you get feedback. You can actually see like, what's
Right.
actually happening. You can choose whether you want to support like, refugees in one country or people that are being displaced. Some of the current emergencies that you're seeing in the world, and whether that's then where you're saying like, okay, civilians in Gaza, people in Ukraine, people that are suffering from conflict and drought in Sudan. So like, you can actually choose where your money goes.
And that's what I love about it. You're actually, it's not just, sharing 80 cents or $1.60 or whatnot. You can actually feel that you're making a difference. And I think that probably leads to them doing it again and again and again. I would think, especially individuals.
No, and I think also to like because we can prove that the money actually reaches the people it's intended to, like, which is like why was I so excited about this? It was about this idea that because I've seen from inside the World Food Program that the money actually makes a difference for the people, and it's so cheap. So why couldn't we actually get more together? Now it's not replacing everybody else, but even like the 80 cents, $1.60, as you're saying, yeah, together we can actually have a significant amount of money that actually then does make a difference for like thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people.
Yeah, it's spectacular. How did you engage corporate leaders to invest and realize that their own economic impact and reputation is actually stronger by making a social and environmental impact?
So I think it really depends. Sometimes it's like, individuals or leaders of organizations that take an initiative. It might be somebody working in sustainability or in the foundation of a company, but it might also be like the CEO. And we've had CEOs of companies or startup founders that said like, as part of the corporate culture, they allow everybody of the team members every year to choose like their favorite charity and like donate to them, right? Like, and it's like, and I think this is a little bit like where there's an element there. It's not just about giving back and like doing good. It's also about like creating meaning for the employees. And I think that's an important factor where this meaning for the employees might be something that's even, harder to measure in the immediate fact, but it might even be something that's positive for your bottom line as a company.
Yeah, well, we started this Leaders Who Care series to share about leaders that are showing that their business and even their lives are better by making a social and environmental impact at the same time. And what we've also found is because part of our business is attracting talent for our clients because we represent them as leaders who care. And it actually does help them attract the very best talent because they want to make money, but they also want to have purpose. They don't want to just work for money, which is what you're talking about. And so we found employee engagement, talent acquisition, talent retention, even the development of talent works better when these type of programs are in a company. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, I imagine like, and I think like, I guess people who engage with us would be the ones that actually think that way. But even those who are on the fence, like I think it depends a little bit, like where sometimes we even interface with people who are, maybe start from a different place where they're thinking about like purely profit maximization, best talent, and like not doing good. But like most people actually care. And I think, and specifically when you're thinking about like your team members, attracting new talent, specifically also younger people, I have to say it's rare to meet somebody who said like, well, I really don't care. Most of them actually do, and they're looking for ways how they can get engaged.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, talent-wise, people join people, they don't join a company. And there's a famous quote by Maya Angelou, who you probably have heard of, is where she says, initially people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you've done, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And when you're in an interview and that person made you feel good about the people at that company and working with them, it's priceless.
No, exactly. And like I can only imagine like we're um specifically like if you think about the talent and that's out there, like of people that want to actually do things, like I'm calling it like, I want to get engaged with a cause and move something ahead. Sometimes that may be in the core product of the company where I say like, well, we're developing a product that's also like affordable for population groups that are maybe like not as fortunate, and like we make it affordable and we make it like accessible for people. But sometimes it might also be like something completely new, or giving back through like volunteering or something like that.
You know what else we found? Because as you know, we've always had a relationship with you and World Food Program. We also found that how it impacts families. And when Joe or Jane come back home, there's two things that we find can happen. Oh my God, work sucks. I'm so tired. I'm going to sit on the sofa. Get me a beer. I know what you mean. Oh, yeah, but I've been home the whole day. Don't tell me about your problems, whatever. Or, hey, let's have dinner together. I want to tell you what the company did today. And we're probably, the business is going better because we're probably going to get bonuses. And tomorrow we're having this meeting about food security or share of the meal or whatnot. And guess what? The kids hear both of those things. And when people come home, and that really is an enduring, sustainable method, if you will, of changing things. And it's so amazing to hear people that we put into companies or people in companies that are our clients talk about that and how much a difference it makes. I don't know if you get into that type of deep conversation, how it even goes back to the family of the employees of the company.
I mean, often like also like with individuals where, they are saying like, let's say, corporate leaders that say like, I love share the meal. And then they're telling me stories about like how, their kids want to donate or share the meal with share the meal, but they actually look too small to actually donate yet. Right. And then they'll get the mom or dad to actually donate. And it is actually something that I find fascinating in terms of, thinking about educating people or like showing them ways of how you can get engaged and actually change something. Because I do feel that a lot of people want to do things, but then they don't know how. And
Right.
like opening up these opportunities, like, sometimes it's like something very, very localized, right? Like where I say like, hey, I want to get engaged in my local community, and help do something. But it's even like in the international space to actually be able to like to help in situations that you hear on the news where something really bad happens, and you are able to actually make a positive contribution towards that, um, rather than just complain, or rather than just sit there and say like, oh my, I don't know what to do. Like there's literally something you can do right now. I think that is very powerful also for individuals. And like people tell me this, where it's like, it's in their teams, or it's like even at home when they're having like, dinner conversations.
Yeah, I've been finding it. part of the Leaders Who Care series is we've started, we've always interviewed youth, even 18 to 29, and we're still doing that a lot. But we've now started also with 8 to 18-year-olds. And it amazes me, and it is just substantiated what we just talked about, that we have a 10-year-old that's writing her 5th book about families and being together and belonging. And then we had another gal from Liberia who started a skincare company so kids can be empowered in their own skin, that we actually call them present future leaders who care now, because they're no longer just future leaders who care, they're present. And so there's a lot of benefit all around by being involved in something like this. It's not new, but in the world we're in, it's so important that it keeps happening. And I want to segue a little bit into how technology gets involved in this and what you're doing in that realm. You know, they say, they say that the 4th industrial revolution is about tech, AI, virtual, etc. But the 5th has become more and more about humanity. And we focused on how impact and talent come together, like we're talking, that you advanced by creating and leading the UN's World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is the world's largest social impact startup accelerator, correct?
It probably is. I mean, we're running a total of 20 social impact accelerator programs this year. So like I'm I guess by sheer number, it might be.
Yeah, no, it's spectacular. Can you share how you secure and vet the innovators, the funders, the partners? I mean, there's a lot to do there, and be able to, and even the talent for that matter, to do it. And how do you select and support them, that it's financially good, makes sense, and it, again, like we talked about, you know, meets the mission?
Absolutely. No, and look, we started essentially like from what we were just discussing about, like share the meal. Like starting Share the Meal was really hard. There weren't just that many accelerator programs or support infrastructures out there for social entrepreneurs or social impact startups in that case. And so that, you know, I got the opportunity to then actually start this for the World Food Program, doing exactly that, like what, you know, what people know from Y Combinator, from for-profit startup accelerators for global social impact. Starting off for the World Food Program, what we do is like we're actually looking for innovations globally, then typically invite these innovators or startups or companies to a 1-week training program we call Innovation Bootcamp, with a pitch event in front of investors. And then the best teams go into what we call sprint phase. They get up to $100,000 of grant funding, hands-on support to our team, and connections to World Food Program's field offices, and connections to partners. And we're actually running 20 of these types of programs this year, not just for WFP, but also for other global programs and partners. So like, for instance, for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on primary healthcare vaccine delivery. We're running now an innovation accelerator program for the Adaptation Fund on climate adaptation, actually, where we're looking for innovation and startups right now. This is the types of programs. It's typically based on global competitions, like, you know, believing in open innovation. So like, it's not just, you know, people from the US or from Western Europe, but globally people and startups can apply. And then, yes, we do a rigorous, you know, vetting process. Like typically out of 1,000 applications, we only select the 10 best. And that is hard. So there's, of course, oftentimes there's more than 10 great startups and innovations. And then it's just about then also like how much funding do we have? I think this is where I can only encourage others, like, you know, there's other entities, corporates, startup accelerators, venture capitalists, impact funds that are now active or getting more engaged. For me, there's a huge open playing field. Like, I think a lot more people need to get engaged. And you can make money and also have impact. We don't make money. We're full 100% nonprofit.
Right.
But so like we essentially get funded by, you know, governments, corporates, foundations, high net worth individuals that, you know, believe in the same logic of what I was just describing. So instead of, you can share, you know, like your meal, you can donate for emergency response. But, you know, a lot of investors or people from the tech world actually think, well, you know, as for a living, I invest into new things. So why don't I use my grant-making philanthropy also to say like, well, I want to invest into something like that we're building, and that will have a multiplier on its impact.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And It's got to be so hard, there's so many, what's that expression about who knows how many Einsteins are in that country or this area or whatnot, and with the cure or the whatever, right? And if you just, like the young people I was talking about, if you just give them the opportunity, one step of the opportunity, they know how to take the next step, and they just go, and the impact can be spectacular. What happens with a particular one of the 10 when they start growing? Where does the plan, where does it take them to?
So, so after the accelerator program, we also have a scale-up enablement program, and most recently, we actually started our very first loan and guarantee fund with the UN Capital Development Fund. So, like, it's first time we actually providing loans and guarantees. Now, the startups or innovation, we're agnostic whether it's for profit or non-profit typically. So, if you want, our vision is that they create impact at scale for the people. Some of the most vulnerable people who are hungry, or they make emergency response more efficient and effective. And so it could be that some of these solutions become like, a vendor to the World Food Programme, and we actually use the service for longer term. If it's a for-profit startup, they might also just create a sustainable business that keeps on growing. And there's different solutions there, where it's like one of the startups we've supported to expand in Latin America. It's called Nylus. Actually, it's a platform that connects urban food deserts, like hungry, poor people in urban food deserts, with surplus or cosmetically rejected foods on farms. So essentially, like, they have a digital platform that bring them together, but it's a for-profit business model. And I find that really exciting. So in a way, they will also grow without us. They will also be able to solve malnutrition and hunger in different places. But of course, through our help, I hope we can also help them scale faster.
Yeah, there's just one aspect. The cosmetically not right, food is good food still, and we waste so much stuff, and that's just one area that you're talking about. How do you see AI impacting all this?
AI is huge, is going to be huge, and I think specifically also in the impact sector is highly not being seen in the disruption or potential that it has. I think it's generally in the business world, even people don't realize how fast the change is going to be.
Yeah.
But let's say, I'll give you an example of a tool that recently, like, this is an internal tool that the World Food Programme has developed. And in that case, it's a supply chain optimization tool that's for upstream optimization. Now, in the beginning, they started development, had essentially an Excel spreadsheet for optimization. Now it's an AI model that helps them optimize. And it's something that, you would think that, well, like, that sounds something that, that is boring, or that's something everybody has done this before. The interesting thing there is that AI now enables the team not only to do this better at scale, but they are also able to essentially do this like on a cloud base, so like it can be replicated by different people at the same time with AI. Now, in this model, and like I'll just, what that does, it's essentially like optimizes where food is coming from and supply chain routes to warehouses where the World Food Programme actually has to bring foods. The team is called Scouts. So in the first implementation in Western Africa, they've been able to save $6 million just in the first implementation of the tool with AI.
Wow.
Now, and that's just something that you have to think about. Like, they may have built that tool with $100,000, right? And that helps you unlock a value of $6 million that you have saved and is now available for more food for people. And that just shows you the disruptive potential of, in a positive way, what we can imagine the future is going to hold for us. And the second example, maybe just to mention, like, another startup we support is called Ignitia. They do hyper local kind of weather forecast farming advice for smaller farmers in developing countries. Again, would never work without AI and satellite data. And they have right now 700,000 recurring paying smallholder farmers. So just to say, like, a test case, does it work? Well, they have 700,000 farmers that keep on paying for that subscription.
You know what I love about it, and in LA, we say we're going to have to leave them wanting more. So because there'll have to be a sequel, and I think we're going to probably have to do a sequel on this. But we do a lot of work in conflict and peace as well. And the examples you're giving, when you're feeding people, first of all, it's not enough to just feed people, and it's not enough just to talk about peace. You have to do both. But if you're feeding people and you're doing these innovations are helping, like those two examples you gave, that's the path to peace very often as well, because then there's dependency, there's economic development together, there's all this stuff happening. You don't have time to hate people. You want to do more, you want to do more, you want to do more. I really believe that's a major impact on peace even.
No, it's like it's one of the sad parts of, like, what happens in areas where there's drought, where there's conflict, where maybe because of climate change there's even more droughts. Maybe there's like disasters like floods, and then livelihoods get destroyed. Like it's oftentimes it's an accelerant to maybe there have been conflicts before, but then of course if there's even less food available in a country, or if people are starving, like it's simple logic that is not going to be helpful for any sort of situation. And if there have been, and I think this is one of the aspects of, if we want to have stability, like, I mean, we actually know, like, even right now that, I didn't mention this before, but right now we're living actually in a phase, there's a global food crisis. So unfortunately, like, food insecurity is rising. So there's more hunger actually, like, than 6-7 years ago. And even acute hunger, so people marching towards starvation, the number has more than doubled since COVID. That's something that should concern us. This is something that we should actually strive towards, like, helping people, because it's the right thing to do, but also it's something that will longer term benefit all of us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the aspect of, like, having a broader impact and a broader impact lens beyond like the immediate need is important. But then also this is where innovation is, I think, really, really helpful, because some of the examples that I can talk about, I sometimes talk to people and they say, like, well, there's nothing we can do about hunger. And, like, the reality is so far on the opposite end. Like, there's so much we can do, and there's even things we can do right now to change something for the better. And, like, I think spreading this message of hope that there's something positive that we can do is really important, because that's the worst thing for me, when people get like this, they feel disempowered, they feel they have nothing that they can contribute, but there's so much that can actually happen.
And that's why I like Share the Meal too, and everything. The domino effect, we talk about Einstein's. If you're in survival mode because you're starving, you're going to do whatever it takes, including conflict, to feed your family. If you're in survival mode, there's no creativity. That person may be brilliant in some stuff and we'll never know because they're in survival mode. And then that impacts other people. This isn't rocket science. It's not simple, but it isn't rocket science to see the domino effect of all of this. And I agree, those innovators you talked about making that impact then leads to Joe or Jane or Juan or Samish or whatever somewhere doing great things also. And in fact, a lot of times paying it forward because someone helped them. So it's an incredible message. And I have one last question on this part, even though I'd love to just keep talking, actually. But, one client told me it was 2021. He said, Mark, the year 2020 was like the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a cool remark. And now we're already in 2024. It almost feels like the pandemic was yesterday and years ago at the same time. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
I mean, what I'm most grateful for is actually that there is so much good that happens and that can happen to help people across the world. Like, because, like, that's when you think about, like, we want to end world hunger. Like, sounds daunting, sounds like impossible to do, but I'm grateful for everything, and, like, this is where colleagues of the World Food Program, partners, like, that happens every day, and, like, it's actually possible to do something. And I don't want to be like, it's specifically like grateful is not even maybe the right word, but it's something that is deeply inspirational, that's for me. And so the second question, sorry, was remind me.
What are you most hopeful for?
What am I most hopeful for? Honestly, it probably is. It is around innovation. It would be around in technology and the disruptive or transformative potential that it holds, like together with businesses, together with startups, because this is where I deeply believe, like, you know, the same logic we have for investing into like startup founders because it's becoming $1 billion valuation company. The same logic applies to solving big problems. And, you know, part of the work that we're doing right now, and it is actually showing that it's possible, and it's not limited to just pure social impact. It can also be like a business that
Sure.
creates money, makes money, gets more investor money, and still does good in the world. And I think that's what I find really exciting and gives me hope.
No, well said. And you know, I'm grateful that you answered that ad way back when to World Food Program, because you obviously have made a huge difference, and you should be proud of yourself. And I know there's a lot more to go, but you clearly are one of the leaders who care. So congrats on that, and that gives me a lot of hope that that we can still keep making a difference, and even, you know, each person even doing a little bit by millions can do a lot. So thanks for joining us and sharing all that.
Thanks so much, Mark. You're too kind. And I think there's so many great people out there that do great things. And so many people do care about the world that I think together we can make a lot bigger difference still.
Amen. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.